David Freiberger.
And I'm Chad Reynolds.
And in this video, we're going to show you how to install a distributor. Before we get started, I want to show you just a little bit of how a distributor works so that you can picture what's going to go on here in the video. If I take off our cutaway distributor cap here, you can see that there's a reluctor and a pickup inside the distributor. And as the distributor shaft turns, each one of these little teeth passes by there and triggers your electronic ignition when to send a spark. That spark goes through the rotor here, which aligns with the distributor cap where your spark plug wires go. And as you can see, the terminal on the rotor spins around to send sparks to all the 8 cylinders in the engine. And of course, we're assuming you have 8 cylinders, as you should. I showed you how the shaft rotates inside the distributor, but you can see this one that is installed in the engine, the shaft won't turn because it is meshed with the camshaft inside the motor. But the housing will rotate independently of the shaft, and that's the setting that we need to get correct in order to align the rotor with the #1 spark plug terminal, which is what you're going to learn when we next show you how to actually install the distributor.
We're going to cover 2 scenarios for installing a distributor in your engine. Later on in the video, you're going to see how you would do it if you're starting completely from scratch. But first, we're going to show you how to install a distributor on an engine that already has a working distributor. We're doing it here at JEGS Performance Group on an engine dyno, but it's exactly the same scenario if you do it at home in your car.
Before we begin, it's really advisable to know what your engine's firing order is and where the spark plug wires go on the distributor cap. You can find the location of your #1 cylinder and your firing order and your direction of distributor rotation all online or in your service manual, but here's a few tips. First, if you have a distributor that has vacuum advance, point to the vacuum advance canister like this, and it will tell you which way your distributor rotates. In this case, it rotates this way. So this distributor on the small block Chevy rotates clockwise, which means that all the spark plug wires go on the distributor cap in clockwise order following the firing order. Since I happen to know that this is the #1 spark plug wire, which you can follow down to the #1 cylinder, that means that our firing order on this small block Chevy is 184-36572. Just good information to have before you start disassembling anything. Now, if you're starting with an engine that is running fine and you're just going to R&R the distributor, the things that we want to do are make sure that we mark everything so that we can get it back in the same place that it came out. We already showed you how to do that with the firing order, just so it's square in your head. But the next thing you're going to want to do is mark the relationship of the distributor housing to the engine block. And this is mostly handy if you're going to be installing the same distributor so you can get it back in the same place. If you're swapping out your stock distributor for a new MSD unit, this isn't quite as handy, but it's a good point of reference. Once you've got the relationship of the housing and the engine marked, the next thing you're going to do is remove the distributor cap and mark the location of the rotor inside the distributor. I find it handy to use something like a straight edge, like this screwdriver, and I'm going to mark exactly on an immovable object, such as this throttle bracket, which I'm not going to touch during the remainder of this installation, so I know exactly where that rotor is going to point.
Now that David's got the distributor all marked up exactly where it needs to stay, I'm going to take the distributor out. The first thing is that you need to remove the distributor hold down clamp, which holds the housing of the distributor in place while the engine's running so that the timing doesn't change from it flopping around. After I do that, I can just yank this thing out, except if this was on a Ford. On a Ford, you need to be careful because the oil pump drive shaft will stick to the distributor and you could pull it out, end up dropping it, and it'll end up in there where you have to fish it out with a magnet. So just be careful so you don't have to do that.
Once you have the distributor out of the engine, the main thing you want to worry about is do not crank over the motor. Don't do it with a starter, don't put a wrench on the front of it, nothing, because you're relying on everything staying in the exact same spot so you can line up these marks that you've made. So let's assume that you've come back with the same distributor that you took out, and you're going to line up the mark at the housing with the mark on the block. However, because the gear that's at the bottom of most distributors is cut helically, that means that the line for the rotor is not going to line up perfectly to let the distributor drop straight in. you're going to have to take the rotor and lead it a little bit ahead of the mark that you've made in order to have it drop in and have that gear mesh properly. For example, you see that right now I've got the rotor perfectly lined up with my mark, but the distributor won't go in. I'm one tooth off. That means that I want to lift it up and just move one tooth back on that gear, and sets right in like it was meant to be. Now I can rotate my distributor housing, align the mark right there, and I am halfway home. Once I've got the housing all lined up and the rotor pointed in exactly the right place, I can reinstall the distributor hold down clamp to hold the distributor in position, making sure that it does not move anywhere. If I'm reinstalling my old distributor, I can simply put my old distributor cap back on right in place and I'm ready to go. But many of you will be installing a new distributor, which means you've got a new distributor cap to deal with, like so. And I could bet you can see the problem coming, which is how are you going to know where all the spark plug wires go? Well, in this method, we're going to make it really simple by just taking the wires and moving them on the cap directly from your old distributor cap to your new one. The distributor caps have some identifying features on them, such as the location of the hold down clamp, and you can use that to eyeball where the terminals match up. For example, this is the number 1 terminal on the old cap, this is the number 1 terminal on the new cap right here. So that means I can just start taking off spark plug wires and move them in perfect order all the way around the cap. That's 1, that's 8, that's 4, and so on, all the way around the cap. And you can double check your work simply by following the spark plug wire down to the cylinder to make sure it's going to the right place. The scenario I just showed you really depends on taking the same distributor and pulling it out of the engine and putting it back in. But what happens if you're putting in a different distributor? In that case, you won't have this mark to rely on. You're going to be starting from scratch, but you will know where the rotor is pointing based on your mark. So if that's what's going on, what you want to do is before you take it apart, make sure that you know exactly where on the distributor cap that rotor is pointing. Now in my scenario, I've got it pointed exactly at the number 2 cylinder. When I put in my new distributor, regardless of the configuration of the housing or where it is in the engine, I know that for the timing to be correct, I need to set it up again so that the terminal is pointed right in line with the rotor on that number 2 cylinder.
Now that we've covered the installation in an engine that's already been running, we're going to cover how to do the same installation on an engine that's been taken apart, or you've turned it over with the distributor out of it, or what have you. And in order to do that, we've got to start with finding number 1 cylinder's top dead center.
When you're installing a distributor from scratch, the goal is to figure out how to align the rotor with the number 1 terminal inside the cap. And to do that, you need to figure out where top dead center on the number 1 cylinder is on the engine. On this small block Chevy, it is the frontmost cylinder on the driver's side. I've removed the spark plug from that cylinder because what I'm going to do is just lightly put my thumb over the hole and crank the engine over until I feel my thumb getting blown off by the compression stroke. Now I don't want to put my finger in that hole because the piston's going to come up and smash it off and I'm going to scream and curse and it's just going to be an emergency room nightmare. So I'm barely going to touch my thumb over the spark plug hole, crank over the engine and feel it blowing my thumb off, at which point I'm going to line up the timing mark on the damper with 0, which means top dead center on the compression stroke of the number 1 cylinder. So the spark plug is gone, my thumb is over the hole, and I'm just tapping the engine over until I find that compression stroke. There, you hear that? My thumb blew off of the hole. And now I can look here on the MSD timing tape and its relationship to the timing pointer on the vibration dampener of the engine, and I can see that I got to 10 degrees after top dead center. That means I went a little bit too far. And what my goal actually is to set the piston right at the point of my initial timing mark, which on this small block Chevy is going to be about 12 degrees before top dead center. So I went 22 degrees too far, and I'm going to keep bumping it around till I get it right. What will happen is you'll also see that the 0 mark will come around again, but that is top dead center on the exhaust stroke, not on the compression stroke, which is why I'm looking to have it blow my thumb out of the hole. There we go, and I got it perfect that time. Look, we're at about 11 degrees before top dead center, which means I can now proceed to drop the distributor in and perfectly line up the rotor and the terminal inside the cap so that my initial timing is just about perfect. Now that we have the piston in the number 1 cylinder exactly where we want it, at 11 degrees before top dead center, which is where our initial timing setting is going to be, what we want to do is install the distributor so that the rotor points exactly at the number 1 spark plug terminal. To help me do that, I've decided that I want this terminal to be number 1, and I am marking that location on the housing. The truth is, at this point, you can put the number 1 terminal wherever you want. Wherever the distributor will fall in, if you make that number 1 and then just follow your firing order around the cap, that works. But the other truth is that a lot of guys like to follow the factory manual as far as where his number 1 goes, and that's what I've done here on this Chevy distributor. So, once I've got that marked, I can plop the distributor back in the engine. And here's where my rotor is. And so I'm going to line that mark on the housing up directly with the rotor, which I have done right there. Now I want to get my distributor clamp and clamp the housing in place so that it's exactly lined up and doesn't get messed up while I'm installing my cap and rotor and all the other parts. Now I've got my distributor housing locked down, and we'll see if I got this right. Looking at my mark there on the housing and aligning it with the rotor, I install the cap, and sure enough, it all points directly to that number 1 cylinder. Now I've cheated a bit here because we've pre-made our spark plug wires, but if I hadn't, what we would do is follow the firing order of the engine around the circumference of the cap. Again, we know the Chevy rotates clockwise and we know the firing order, so we would start with 1 and then go 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 7, 2. There you go. Now that's the mechanical installation of the distributor. In this video we haven't covered any of the electronics, but remember you can download any of the MSD instruction manuals from msdignition.com.
Now that we've got the distributor installed and tightened up, the next thing you're going to need to do is set the timing. Watch the next MSD video and you'll learn how.
One last tech tip before we go. Some of you will have noticed that when I did the video, the distributor just slid right in there like magic. Well, that's not going to happen to you in the real world. The deal is, almost all distributors also drive the oil pump, and so you've got to get the oil pump drive, which is either a slot or a hex, aligned perfectly at the same time that the gear aligns to get the rotor where you want it. And that's a whole lot of stuff. You'll see a lot of people using a screwdriver trying to get that oil pump drive shaft lined up the right way, but here's an easier solution. Drop your distributor in and feel the gears in there as you do it. Right about like that, so that you've got the gear leading where you want the rotor just a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is crank the engine over, and as the gear rotates, at some point it's going to line up that oil pump drive shaft and it's going to pull the distributor down into place. Watch this. Like magic. And now at this point you're going to have to take the engine all the way back around again, find number 1 at the top dead center to make sure that you got it, put it in the right place, but that's what you're going to deal with in the real world.